All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. It's my pleasure today to have Mitch Titchler on today. Mitch, I don't know if you know this or not, guest number 4 on the Big Douglas Show.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, and
let's do it.
it's been a little bit since we've had you on, which is my fault. I'm excited to have you on now. Uh, it's 53 man cut down. I guess really it's a race to 50 because 3 of them obviously we know who they are. Let's. Do you have your 53 ready? You ready to get started on this thing?
Yeah, let's go.
All
All
right.
right.
Let's see. To me, the quarterbacks is easy. You're keeping all 3, right?
Correct. 3 quarterbacks: 1 Carson, 2 Taylor, 3 Sam. I know folks love Sam Howell. He was great in the preseason. Let's remember who he's playing against there. This is Carson is here up top. Taylor, there's a pretty big gap between Carson and Taylor. Same gap between Taylor and Sam. Hopefully Sam gets there in the future. He's just not there yet for folks that are
It
super
would be
excited.
wonderful if that happened. A guy like Carson Strong gets let go today. Are you looking for a quarterback to put on the practice squad? Or are you happy with the 3 we have?
I'm happy with the 3 I have, and honestly, I want Sam Howell. The third string quarterback gets all the reps against the first team defense during the week, and usually they're running the opposing team's offense as a scout offense. But I want Sam Howell to get as many reps against the Commanders' starting defense as possible, just to get as much work as he can against the best players. And so bringing in a 4th QB would be counterintuitive to that, and would, I think, hinder Sam Howell's growth a little bit because he won't get those reps against the first string defense.
Where do you stand on Wentz?
I kind of stand in the same place as I did when they signed him. I didn't love the signing. I think in the short term, he's going to be better this season than the quarterbacks that Washington has seen come through here. But when you look at the big picture, the 10,000-foot view, I don't think he helps you get anywhere closer to a Super Bowl. And ultimately, this fan base needs playoff appearances because it's been a while, since we've seen any sort of consistency in the playoffs. But at the same time, are you really fighting? Do you really want to see the team make the playoffs, or do you want to see them make a real run at a Super Bowl? And I think Carson is good enough to get to the playoffs. I don't think he's good enough to win significant football games at a meaningful time.
That'll get us onto the running back spot, which obviously is sad today. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on Brian Robinson, but I will ask you, just because I know you were out at the park today, do you have any updates?
No real updates. I mean, we know that he had surgery. He posted a picture on his Instagram saying that surgery went well. I believe John Allen said that they think that he might be released from the hospital today, which leads you to believe that those injuries aren't super, super serious. Obviously, a gunshot wound's a gunshot wound, but as for what's going to happen with him and how long he's going to be out and all that stuff, it's really tough to say. The team can place him on the non-football injury list. If they do, he's out for a minimum of 4 games. To me, that seems like a reasonable place to put him. That way he doesn't take up a 53 spot on the 53-man roster, and you give him plenty of time to heal, get back, be 100%, be ready to go. And I don't know, candidly, whether he's out for 4 weeks, whether he's out for 1 week, whether he's out for the season. I don't know enough about the situation yet, so I think in the next couple of days we'll get some updates on some more specifics about what happened and how long he may be out for. So I don't want to speculate.
I appreciate that. When I did this yesterday, I did it before the news. I had 3 running backs on the final 53. Today I have 4 on the final 53 with Gibson, obviously McKissick, and I'll take both Patterson and Williams to make up for Robinson. Is that how you see it?
I would be shocked if they keep 4 if Brian Robinson isn't one of those 4. So Brian Robinson obviously is on this roster. It's just a matter of
assuming
what
he
they
misses
end up
4.
doing.
Let's assume he misses 4 games.
So if they're going to put him on the non-football injured list, I think they still keep just 3 running backs, and I think that is the J.D. McKissick. I think it is obviously Antonio Gibson. And then I think that Jonathan Williams beat out Jared Patterson in camp this year. However, if Antonio Gibson's going to be your starting running back, he's not going to be your kick returner. And Jared Patterson did that last year and did it, relatively well. And I think it's a situation that he could step in and take that role. So that might give Jared Patterson a little bit of an edge over a guy like Jonathan Williams, who hasn't done it quite as much. Obviously, you want to keep the best 53, and if Dax Milne is going to be your punt returner, and we'll get to that when we get to the wide receivers, ideally he could also potentially be your kickoff returner. We saw Jared Patterson do it last year. We saw the team have faith in him last year. I wouldn't be surprised if that gives him a little bit of an edge, and he ultimately makes the roster because of that. And then obviously once Brian Robinson comes back, things would rotate around, and it would be and he probably would be sent to the practice squad or released and then re-signed or whatever they're trying to do with him.
It's interesting. I'm with you on Williams. I'm not sure that the fan base is, but to me, he looks a little bit more explosive than Patterson.
Yeah, I mean, Jared Patterson has a great story. Plus, he's the local guy. Plus, he's buddies with, grew up with Chase Young. There's a lot of things working for Jared Patterson in the tingly feel good scenario. I think
to your point. I mean, I think we're going to talk about this a couple of times about how important special teams is to making this 53.
Yeah, the thing I love about Jared Patterson, he's such a small dude in stature and height, but he's a bowling ball behind the line of scrimmage, and so he does such a good job in games. We saw it in the third preseason game against the Ravens. He just kind of disappears behind the line of scrimmage, and when he bolts through that hole, he's so low to the ground. He's so low to the ground. He's so compact. He's a tough dude to tackle, and they're going to need. Antonio Gibson is a good running back, but they need somebody for those short yardage plays, and I think it's a toss up between those two who's better at the short yardage. But Jared Patterson gives you something that no one else on this roster really does. So I really wouldn't be shocked to see it be Jared Patterson.
Well, and I looked up the numbers a little while ago. 70 carries for Patterson last year. He got the rock quite a bit last year. So he also has experience on his side.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that Ron Rivera said about the running back position, that he wants all those guys to play. Now, it's a lot easier to say that when your three are Brian Robinson, J.D. McKissick, and Antonio Gibson. But we saw it last year, even when it was Gibson's job and J.D. McKissick was clearly the passing down back. You saw Jared Patterson get plenty of work. I mean, 70 carries over 17 games is, basically 5 carries a game, and you count 20 towards, Antonio Gibson, another 3 to 5 to J.D. McKissick, and that's your stable of run plays for a game. So I think, Robinson is clearly an upgrade over Jared Patterson, but no matter who the 3 running backs are that are on this roster to start the season, I think all 3 are gonna see game time.
Most definitely. All right, for the wide receivers, I picked 6. I have McLaurin, Samuel, Dotson. I always say Samuel, Dotson, Sims, Milne, and Brown. Do you expect that they'll keep another one?
No, I think that's a 6. It was kind of that last spot is between Alex Erickson and Dax Milne, and Dax Milne has proved to be a more reliable wide receiver in the pass game, and he's plenty reliable in the punt game. So that 6th wide receiver spot is really kind of a special team spot. A guy for whoever the punt returner is going to be, and Dax Milne, I think, has earned that spot. I think what's interesting is De'Ami Brown is most likely going to be your inactive wide receiver on game day. Yes. And he's had a pretty unimpressive camp, I would say, both with his hands and in his route running. And, there have been examples kind of in all 3 games of, where his deficiencies are. And he's a second-year, third-round pick. By no means is the team cutting him, trying to sign him through the practice squad, any of those things. He's on this roster. But I think being that kind of inactive guy, you're really being put on notice that, hey, you got to get better. And that's something that De'Ami has got to be able to read the room and see, especially as he was playing deep into the 3rd preseason game.
Well, and again, we talked about it earlier, but no special teams. We had Anthony Armstrong on the show last week, and he said, listen, if I'm De'Ami Brown, I'm going into the special team coordinator's office to say, hey, listen, tell me what to do. I got to play. Because to your point, if you don't play teams, you're not going to dress. And all the rest of them are. I mean, he's not going to take Cam Sims' spot.
Right. And Cam Sims gives you something that no one else on this roster does in his size and height. And, I guess as we get to, maybe that's a good transition to tight end, because that's something that's going to be super interesting to watch, because, this team has kind of 4 of those big athletic tight ends when you look at Logan Thomas, Cole Turner, Armani Rogers, and Cole Hodges. Those four guys are all your kind of new age prototypical tight ends that the league loves. And then you have John Bates, who is no small body himself, but is a more proficient blocker than he is receiver. Doesn't mean he can't catch the ball perfectly fine, but he's definitely the blocking tight end of the group. And if these guys are all healthy and you're able to roll out a 2 tight end set of, Logan Thomas and Cole Turner at the goal line or inside the red zone, teams are going to have trouble covering that. They have trouble. We've seen them have trouble covering just Logan Thomas. And you add in another big body on the other side and Cole Turner, Cam Sims as well. I mean, you're setting up a red zone situation where, teams are going to have to pick and choose who they want to cover, because we know Carson Wentz loves throwing the ball to his tight ends, especially the big guys, and we've seen it in camp. Logan Thomas hasn't caught passes yet, but Cole Turner, before he had the little hamstring injury, was a favorite target of Carson Wentz's and caught touchdown passes on a daily basis. And Cole does such a good job of using his body in the red zone and blocking out DBs and high pointing footballs. He could be a real menace in the red zone. I'm excited to see what Cole Turner can do kind of once he gets healthy.
So you said 4 or 3 tight ends or 5?
So I'm going to start off, I'm going to keep 4 tight ends, because you got to question the health of everybody. Logan Thomas is coming back from the ACL. John Bates and Cole Turner both had soft tissue injuries. They seem to be returning to practice. We're still 2 weeks out from the first game, but those soft tissue injuries are different once you start, running full speed and kind of having a cutoff schedule and all those things. So the 4th tight end I'm keeping is Armani Rogers. He's the perfect training camp story that, the NFL and the NFLPA want to promote. He's a quarterback. A year ago he was playing quarterback in the MAC, and all of a sudden he is the starting tight end for all 3 preseason games for the Washington Commanders. I mean, and he's a big body, and he's done all the things I talked about Cole Turner. Armani Rogers does a very good job of as well. And so I think that he's earned himself a spot, and certainly he's somebody that I think the Commanders hoped would, show well in the preseason, but not this well. And they'd be able to cut him and re-sign him to the practice squad. But I think he's put too much good stuff on tape. And, we talked about the Commanders having 4 of these new age prototypical tight ends. There are enough teams around the NFL that have 0 of those guys, or maybe 1. And so they're going to be looking to pluck off a player like Armani Rogers, who showed, that he can play that role. And so I think if they end up cutting him, that ultimately he's going to get signed by somebody else. So I think they keep him as a 4th tight end.
He was certainly more productive in the preseason. Now, 2 weeks ago, it's been a couple of weeks, but Logan Paulson told me that Hodges was the best of any of them that they added to the roster this year. So just for the sake of the exercise, I'll go with what the tight end says. But Rodgers obviously looked spectacular in the preseason.
And I'll say Hodges is the most well-rounded of the back end of the tight end room between Armani Rogers and him. He's a better blocker than Rodgers is. I think Rodgers is a little better of a pass catcher than Hodges is. But with John Bates being back, I don't know if you're going to keep 4 tight ends if you need 2 of them who are leaning more heavily on the blocking side of the tight end room. And so I think if you're keeping 4, assuming John Bates is healthy, I think he's your second tight end in most 12 personnel.
All right, we'll move to the offensive line. I've selected 8 here. I have Leno, Norwell, Rullier.
How many?
8. You think that's not enough?
Yeah, they're going at least 9. I think they're keeping 10. But go ahead. Who do you have?
Leno, Norwell, Rullier, Turner, Cosme, Schweitzer, Paul, and Lucas. And I could see Charles making the list. But the rest of them don't inspire. It was funny. I had a hard time kind of putting the back end of the 50 together. Some of the names aren't very inspiring. I was huge on Charles when they drafted him. Maybe you guys see something different at practice, but he's yet to impress me from afar.
See, he would be the most athletic of the guards that they have. And when he gets beat badly and, borderline embarrassingly, and makes the slow motion, super slow-mo replay because I'm thinking about the play against Kansas City when Taylor Heineke got called for roughing. He was beat very badly on that play. He's been solid. He's been more solid in games than he has in practices. And I think the fact that ultimately he can be potentially a fourth tackle / guard, plus they started playing him a little bit at center to give him a little bit of work there. I think that, I hate using Ron's word, but the positional flex that he provides gives him a spot on this roster. They're keeping a minimum of 9. I think they're keeping 10. I think Chris Paul is the 10th. I think,
I had Paul on the list.
You had Paul on. So Chris Paul would be on. I think Keith Ishmael makes it because you need a backup center. Ultimately, there's some machinations there that, Wes Schweitzer, I think, is actually the backup center. But I think Wes Schweitzer is also your starting right guard at the moment. And Trey Turner is probably more your backup swing guard. Now, if Chase Roullier goes down, do they go with Schweitzer at center and move Turner to guard? Probably. But ultimately, they would love for Tyler Larson to be healthy. He's coming off Achilles from I think it was late November or early December. So he probably isn't going to be back until November, December of this year. So it'd be a little bit down the line. I have them keeping 10, the 8 you said, plus Sadiq Charles, plus Keith Ishmael. But I expect that when other teams make their cuts, if there's a veteran center that's floating around out there, I imagine they would probably look in that direction, and maybe Keith Ishmael doesn't make it. Now, come Tuesday at 4 p.m., if they need to keep an extra DB or an extra, D lineman, maybe they just outright cut Keith Ishmael and, knowing that even though he's a third-year, fifth-round pick, there might not be a huge market for him out there. He's had quite a tough preseason this year. He looked better. He almost looked better last year than he did this year.
Which is interesting because, again, another guy they were really high on and had huge expectations for. You don't think that they were that high on him?
I think they were hopeful with him. I mean, obviously Chase Roullier is poster boy for a late-round draft pick, made good, and I think they were hoping that Keith Ishmael could be the same. He's also a guy that they loved because he could play both guard and center. A lot of times center is such a specialized position that guys coming out of college are just centers, and the fact that he kind of had a little bit of that position flex, I think they were a little excited for. Ultimately, I don't want to condemn him, but I think he hasn't made the jump like they expected him to, and he may make the roster. I'd be surprised if in 2 weeks he's still on the roster, and I don't want to be crushing guys' NFL dreams like that, but I think that might be where we're at there.
We'll switch over to the defensive side. Before we do, which side of the ball do you have more faith in?
I mean, I guess you got to say the offense. I don't have a ton of faith in Carson Wentz. My thing with Carson is he's a good quarterback. He gets caught in the moment, and to be this far along in your career and not have command of the big moment, and that big moment can be a third down, or it could be a 2-minute drill. To not have command of the moment at this point in his career, I think is troubling. But he's going to move the ball downfield. I mean, I think he's going to throw a number of touchdowns. I think he's going to rack up the yards. I'm just concerned that in crunch time is when you see some of those kind of boneheaded plays, and that troubles me about him. All that being said, the defense is much more troublesome because all the issues that the team had last year have reared their ugly heads and have not improved. And the coaches all, to a man, kind of are saying it's not going to be a problem. It's just the preseason. Ignore the preseason. Don't worry about it. We saw that defense go from 2 years ago, top 10, to last year, bottom 3. They essentially made no adjustments on the defensive side of the football. They got rid of Landon Collins, which you can love or hate, whatever you think of it. But I think that this team is going to give up a lot of points again. It's going to come up to that, whether the offense can outscore opposing teams, and that's not great.
I've got 9 for the D-line. I've got Sweat, Allen, Payne, Smith-Williams, Mathis, Tuhill, Obata, Wise, and Tony. And Mitch, maybe you know this better than I do. Does Obata count during the regular season on the 53 because he's one of these international players?
So F.A. Obata does count. He's graduated from the International Player Pathway Program and the everything that affords players. David Bada is a German player from the International Pathway Program who I have as actually my 10th D lineman. However, because he's part of the IPP program, he counts as almost an extra practice squad player. And if they wanted him to be active on game day, they'd have to call him up. But essentially, they'll cut him, quote unquote. If another team signs him to their 53, then he goes. Otherwise, they can bring him back to the practice squad as a 17th practice squad player. And so I agree. I have 9 D linemen, and David Bada is kind of quote unquote number 10 with, as depending on how you look at it.
You have Tony making the team?
I have Tuhill.
Okay.
Yes. I think the question with the ninth spot is whether it's William Bradley King or Shaka Toney.
Correct.
Ultimately, I think William Bradley King has more physical tools and is more athletic and has a brighter future. I don't even want to say long term, but improving in the next year, 2 years, 3 years while he's still on his rookie deal. Shaka Toney is a more refined player at the moment, and so I think he can step in and help you, especially because as much as we talk about what's going to happen in instead of Chase Young with the James Smith-Williams, Casey Tuhill kind of combination, Montez Sweat can't be on the field for every single play. So you're going to need another D end. And I think F.A. Obata in run situations can be a big defensive end, and in pass situations can be kind of a slippery D tackle. So he's a guy that's going to be interesting to see how they deploy because he can do kind of a little bit of everything, and I think you'll see him play both end and inside as well. But in pure pass rushing downs, obviously you want Montez Sweat on the field. If for some reason Montez can't, I think Shaka Toney is a more refined pass rusher, so that's why I have him over William Bradley King.
Linebacker, the whole fan base is distraught. I've got 4: Holcomb, Davis, Hudson, and Mayo. And I just kind of put Mayo on there because they need bodies, right?
I think you're putting Hudson on there because they need bodies. Khaleke Hudson is the 4th of 4, and that 4th might be a guy like Milo Eifler too. Khaleke Hudson has a little bit of a edge because he was a draft pick of theirs, but Eifler's played pretty well. Hudson has as well. At the end of the day, the number of times this season that we're going to see 3 linebackers on the field outside of goal line, I think we're going to be able to count just about on one hand. It's a 2 linebacker system. At times, just a 1 linebacker system. David Mayo is, I think, going to push Jamin Davis for real playing time. I think early in the season, Holcomb and Jamin Davis are your 2 starting linebackers. But if Davis slips up and doesn't play well, David Mayo's right behind him. And Mayo's, I would say maybe a poor man's Lennon Fletcher in that he's kind of unspectacular. He doesn't really flash on tape. At the end of the day, you look up and he's got 10 tackles, and you're like, "Holy crap! How'd this guy rack up these stats?" So he's a guy who just has a nose for the football and is always around it and does a good job. He's not going to cover a tight end 30 yards downfield, which ultimately you're hoping that's what Jamin Davis is on the field for. But he's a solid, no frills linebacker who will get the job done.
The coaching staff, front office, have told anybody that's paying attention they're not concerned about the linebacker position. Are you?
Yes. Anybody who says they're not concerned is either overly optimistic or flat out lying. You had your second-year first-round pick, Jamin Davis, playing in the 3rd preseason game. And Ron can say all he wants that he wanted to get some starters, some extra reps or whatever. Had he shown what he was supposed to show in training camp, they would not have wanted him on that football field. And he was out there and he played well and he flashed, and he should flash. He's a first-round pick playing against majority guys who aren't going to be in the NFL next year or in 24 hours. So he should flash. But until he starts doing that against starters, against real NFL players, you have to have concern because he seems rather slow to diagnosing plays. He's unsure in pass coverage. He seems rather unsure in pass coverage, and overall is if I'm looking at a pass chart and I have to pick out one player on this defense that I want to target, I think he's the easiest option. And I think you're going to see teams, especially, when you get into the division, who kind of know him well, you're going to see tight ends being manipulated and lined up so that they can take advantage of that one-on-one concept. And all the talk about the Buffalo spot and the Buffalo package and all that, and, Landon Collins fit in there as a big linebacker, whatever. The Commanders are going to be trying to line up, whether it's, Derek Forrest or Cam Curl, whoever's playing that kind of hybrid linebacker safety position in the Buffalo package. They're going to be trying to manipulate that guy to be, one-on-one with tight ends. But just like we see on the offensive side of the football, with all the movement that the Commanders use pre-snap, all that movement is to try and isolate guys into bad matchups. And that's something that other teams are going to use against Washington, and I think mainly against a guy like Jamin Davis.
And I think that's I really believe kind of where you're headed. Lots of safeties on the field this year, which is why I don't think the linebacker position is quite – and I think that's just kind of where football is heading with all the speedy, shifty tight ends that they put on the field. I've got 5 cornerbacks. It was tough to put any of the back end of the corners on the team. I put them on there because, again, you got to have some. So I went William Jackson III, Fuller, St. Juice, Holmes, and Elder. But I'm not very excited about either of the 2 guys on the back end of this. Are you – which is rougher, the cornerback room or the linebacker room?
Oh, the linebacker room is definitely tougher. Your Fuller and William Jackson, you should be confident, relatively confident in. Fuller's had an incredible camp and is kind of your savvy veteran in the secondary. Again, almost like I talked about David Mayo, except Fuller is a better player than Mayo. I don't know that Fuller's going to go out and have 10 interceptions this year. He's just going to go out and be a solid lockdown corner. He's not going to, he's not Deion Sanders out there, but he's just a solid football player. And I don't think he gets the respect he deserves, particularly from this fan base, but really in the league for kind of being the guy that he is. He's a solid corner. I like him. I have all 5 of your guys. I also have Danny Johnson on the roster. I think you need 6 corners, and the Danny Johnson core and Elder is rather unspectacular, but you need warm bodies to play in the secondary, and I don't know who those warm bodies are if you're going to cut short, some of those corners. And Josh Drayton has been okay, I guess. I mean, but it
was hard for me to fill out like the last 3 spots on this roster. It just felt like I was putting guys there because we needed to get to 50.
Well, and I think a lot of like I talked about with Keith Ishmael at center, I think you're going to be looking at other teams to see if there's kind of one of those veteran safeties or corners that gets cut that you think is an upgrade. Danny Johnson's a guy who played quite poorly against the Ravens, but has looked pretty decent otherwise. So, it's a tough final thought to have in your mind because, you think about the double move and receivers running wide open behind him. Part of that was a safety combination that was out there. Part of it was, biting hard on a double move, but he's been solid in practice. I think Danny Johnson's on the roster, plus obviously the special teams portion of it.
You mentioned safety, so we'll segue there. I've got McCain, Curl, Forrest, Butler, and Reeves.
Do you even have 50 if you only have 5 corners? And
I told you I was too short.
Yeah, okay.
I couldn't come up with the last 2. I couldn't force myself to put Ishmael like you had, and Danny Johnson, I think, is the other one. So
right. I
left it open. I couldn't do it to myself.
I love the safety group. I think it's quite strong. Derek Forrest, I think, is going to be a welcome surprise to fans. When they come out in that Buffalo package, when they come out in the 3 safety package, you're going to see Derek Forrest on the field a lot. And, if you think back to 2 years ago, Cam Curl made most of his game-changing plays out of the Landon Collins Buffalo nickel spot. And then last year, obviously, Landon ate that up the entire season, and he played well in the spot, so it wasn't, a wasted spot. But he ate up that spot most of the season. Cam Curl was forced to play on the back end. Well, I think this year you're going to see Cam Curl playing a lot more close to the line of scrimmage in that Buffalo package and get after the quarterback. He'll be that corner blitz. He'll be, manned up with some of the tight ends. And I think you're going to see Cam Curl have some more difference-making plays this year than he did last year, much closer to what we saw in his rookie season when he was able to kind of run free there.
And they like Percy in the single high.
Percy Butler is a good free safety. I think he and Bobby McCain. I think he's a young Bobby McCain, and I don't want to undersell Percy Butler because that's maybe his ceiling in the long run might be above Bobby's, but they're very similar players, and I think that they complement each other well, especially in. I'm hoping when this third and long, issue that this team has had for a while, if you're able to roll out McCain and Butler as your two kind of deep safeties, and you run Cam Curl or Derek Forrest around on the underneath, putting pressure on the quarterback, I'm hoping that's a more successful third down situation than we've seen the past couple of years. I mean, particularly last year and this year in the preseason. But the safety group is maybe the strongest on the defense, probably the strongest on the defense. And, outside of maybe the wide receiver group, the strongest on the team. So it's the back end, knock on wood, should be in pretty decent situation.
It feels like this roster is maybe the most predetermined we've had in a while. I mean, if I force you to give me a surprise cut, do you see one?
Surprise cut. I mean, I think a guy like Keith Ishmael would be a surprise cut to many, just because he's been on the roster and he was a draft pick. Outside of that, there's not a whole lot. I mean, maybe the last corner, maybe a Corn Elder being cut would be a surprise to some folks. Outside of that, I got really nothing. I don't think there's a ton of surprises to be had. Ron's a loyal guy. And when he came in, he turned over this entire roster. I think, something like, 4 guys are left from the pre-Ron Rivera era here in D.C., maybe 5. So, he's brought in the folks that he wants, and he's brought in the coaches that he wants. He's brought in the team that he wants. So he's not a guy that's going to go around, cutting a bunch of people. The one thing I said on the radio today, if Keith Ishmael goes, there's a chance that Wes Martin, who's the guard/center that they just re-signed, he was out of Indiana and played with the team last year but got cut. And if they loved him as much as they are claiming they loved him, they would have never cut him. But he's a guy that can also play guard/center, and so maybe he's on the roster. But to most average fans, neither of those guys move the needle very much. So as far as needle moving, I don't think there's any real surprises.
2 more for you. Do you think we'll see a Landon Collins reunion?
No, I don't think he fits in with what this defense is trying to do, because as well as he played at that Buffalo nickel, he's pretty limited in what he can do. If he's on the field, he eats up that spot, and eats up that spot makes it sound like such a bad thing, but because he played that position well last year. But when you have the ability to have 3 safeties on the field, and 2 of them could be, either playing deep as a free or rushing the quarterback, it creates a little bit of confusion for an opposing quarterback reading a defense, trying to figure out what they're doing. For the most part, when Landon's on the field, you know exactly what he's doing. And, if you think of that, if the offense thinks that's an advantage, they take advantage of it. If not, they look away from him and can go the other way. So I don't think there's a spot for him. And I think especially when you look at those 2 young 7th rounders and Christian Holmes and Percy Butler that they brought in, I think they want to find a way to get those guys on the field a little bit more and get them experience. And I don't think that Landon being in the back end kind of helps add to that much.
When we wrap all of these before the season starts, what for you would make for a good season?
I would say the fan in me would say a playoff appearance is a good season because there's so few and far between in Washington. The more critical person in me says you got to see 10, 11, 12 wins for it to be successful. And I say that because they won 7 last year. All of the or they won 8 last year. All the issues they had with COVID off the field with DeShazer Everett, with Montez Sweat's brother, kind of all these things that happened, all the injuries, Curtis Samuel, your first round draft pick, Jamin Davis didn't pan out. Like, they still won 8 games. And now they added a legit quarterback. Hopefully all the off the field stuff goes away. Brian Robinson obviously just happened. So, this is more just thinking kind of big picture. Curtis Samuel looks healthy and good to go. So the offense should be better. The defense has another year together. They should hopefully have gelled a little more. If you roll Taylor Heineke back out with this same group, you'd expect them to win at least the same number of games, if not another 1 or 2, because they're playing a now much easier schedule. So if Taylor Heineke is going to get you 1 or 2 extra wins, Carson Wentz should get you maybe 3 or 4 extra wins, and you're starting to get into that 10, 11, 12 win zone. And I think it's maybe a little unreasonable to expect that, but I think if anything less than, division title and double-digit wins, to me, it makes the Carson Wentz trade not worth it, because I think you can get anything less than that you could have gotten with Taylor. You could get with Taylor Heineke still at the helm.
I lied. One last better chance that Wentz is on the roster as the starting quarterback week 1 next season.
What are the chances you're saying?
You think it's a better chance that he is or is not the quarterback?
I got to tell you, to me, it's a straight 50-50 shot. I think that it depends on, it's silly to say, but it depends on how this season goes. And, Ron Rivera needs to win at some point. And if they're in the middle of the road again this year, 9-8, 8-9, 7-10, 10-7, somewhere in there, Ron's gonna have a tough time getting a second contract running that whole thing back. And so, to me, if they're in that middle section, I think they go all in for one of these quarterbacks in the draft next year and move on from Carson. If they do have an exceedingly good season and get to 10, 11, 12 wins, so whatever it may look like, then I think Carson is back. So, if Carson plays well, then I think Ron gets a contract extension to, ride out this Carson Wentz wave. If Carson plays poorly and Ron is able to make the move to go get the quote-unquote QB of the future, in next year's draft, I think Ron gets a contract extension to ride out the wave of the rookie quarterback. If they stay in the middle here for this year and next year, Ron's going to have a hard time selling ownership and management that he deserves to continue coaching this team, because they'll have been, right there in that mediocre world for, all 4 of his seasons that he'd been there, and he'd be going into kind of a lame duck year in his final season. So I think it's a true 50-50 on whether Carson is here, and Carson ultimately is going to decide it based on how he plays on the field.
Mitch, I appreciate you hopping on today. I know that it was a crazy day with all the Brian Robinson stuff, but I appreciate you sneaking me in. What days are the Commanders Talk podcast coming out now?
We'll have one tomorrow after the 53 breaks down. Generally, we're Monday, Thursday, and then game days on Sunday. Tuesday, Thursday, game days on Sunday. So, and then obviously as news breaks, we always have the emergency pods pop up. And, with this team, there's kind of always news, so we always expect the unexpected.
Yes, you do. Buddy, I appreciate you, man. I really do. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.